So my Flemish is not very good, so I'm not gonna speak in Dutch, but I can speak in French or Italian if you prefer. Molto bene. Hey, allora. Okay, so my presentation is titled "Being an Optimist in a Pessimistic World," and understanding the differences of how FileMaker record locking works. And I had a little bit of struggle trying to figure out the best title for this, because it's not just about being an optimist or a pessimistic or understand record locking. It's much more broad. So I hope you'll really get something out of this presentation. Okay, so my name is Vincenzo Menanno. I work at Beeswax. I'm the director of FileMaker development at Beeswax. I'm certified in almost every version of FileMaker. I'm the author of Inspector. This is my daughter. This is my son. Some of the things that we've done, just to kind of give you a little bit of what the company does, and maybe some interest for you to go look at. So we have a lot of blog posts, and I encourage a lot of my team members to blog about different topics. Some of the topics include PSOS logging, importing on server. If any of you your clients need to import Excel, you definitely need to look at importing on server, because especially if it's in a WAN environment, it can be very slow to import over a WAN, a lot of data from Excel. So using this technique dramatically improves performance on server. Plus, the fact that PSOS, perform script on server, can run asynchronously, so you can just upload a file, let it run on server, and disconnect and do whatever you want. So I have been researching and doing a lot with Tableau lately, and had a session at DevCon. That session recording is now available if you want to look into it, but some really, really exciting and innovative opportunities combining FileMaker and Tableau. If you do anything with the web viewer, you got to check out Simon's blog post on debugging with the web viewers. And recently, one of our interns from 42 did an integration with Apple Maps. So it's very, very cool. That's also on the blog. I'll talk a little bit about our relationship with 42. We have, let me switch over to that slide, to the actual website, 1 second. So this is our about us, who we are. But we have 4 interns from 42, and 42 is a nonprofit, free, tuition-free school. It's one in Paris. It started off in Paris, and now there's another one in Silicon Valley. When I found out about the school, I immediately contacted the lady there, and I immediately started to talk to her about FileMaker. She said, "What is FileMaker?" And so we started a relationship with Jamie, and slowly but surely, I thought there was really interesting synergies between the two. Then I introduced Jamie to FileMaker, and now FileMaker has formalized an internship partnership program with 42. You'll probably hear more about it tomorrow, whatever. But we started with 2 engineers as interns. We hired both of them. And now we have these 2 other engineers, Brandon and Hiroshi. Hiroshi is over here. So Hiroshi. And so Hiroshi did the Apple Maps integration. Alina, she's one of our interns as well, the first intern. Brandon is our first intern. Anyway, just to kind of say that we're really excited at the opportunities that these new people can bring to the community. Not just FileMaker coding, but actually, other kinds of things that they can do. So I invite you to find out more about this program. Okay, being an optimist in a pessimistic world. It's it is about security, performance, and control. So, and it comes with a warning, because what I'm going to show you might not be applicable to certain situations, and you might not need to do that. But if you're really in a situation where performance is a real issue, and you want to drive for the best performance possible, then you need to consider what I'm presenting today. Okay, so let's see. We're going to talk about like different ways that you can edit a record and how that has impact on your solutions. So we'll talk about native editing. We'll talk about how you can do global edits. And then as we started to explore more and more of this, we kind of evolved the different techniques, and I'll show you over time how that evolved. So we have local edits, and I'll explain that. And then we got to a point right now where we're doing local editing, but using the data API. So that's very, very exciting what's possible with that. And then one I don't have an example of is a JavaScript version of that, and so we're not going to cover that one. But we'll cover benefits and drawbacks in terms of all of these. So if you remember the day, how many of you used FileMaker before FileMaker 7? Okay, so you remember the days when you would click in a field and you would lock the record, right? And so let me go back 1 second. Let me see if I can show you this. Some of you have probably seen this before. Let's see. Let's see if this will work. All right. You've seen this before, right? Okay. Damn. Damn, that record is locked. A bad day at work. I'm surprised that that's been around a long, long time. It only has 619,000 views. I don't know. I think it would have more views than that. Anyway, when 7 came along, they changed that, and they changed it so that when you click into a field, you no longer lock the record explicitly. You have to start typing something. Now you've locked the record. Okay, so that's important to understand how that evolved. And so with this approach that I'm using, I also find it very important to be able to measure things. And so you're going to see some demos where I'm using the network monitor tool. How many of you have heard about this tool? It's available on the FileMaker community site. It's a tool that lets you monitor 5003 network traffic. And so I'll show you some videos. You haven't heard of it, Peter? Oh, okay. That's very cool. And so what I've been doing is I write a script, and I have like an outer timing and a very, very close inner timing. The inner timing is just to see what the commit footprint of that record is. And so what I talk about commit footprint is if I change all my calculations from unstored to stored at the point that I want those calculations to evaluate, that's how much of a footprint of time that record needs to evaluate on the server, like this, the smallest amount of time. And so I measure that. I understand how long a record takes to commit. So we'll look at that in the example. So when I run this locally, for example, from here, I have a small record. I have a parent and child relationship with some data, and the inner timing is almost 1 second, both inner and outer. But when I run it on server, the same exact steps, okay, it's much, much smaller. Okay, so you have to think, okay, big credit card companies, they make a lot of money, but they charge 0.03 cents, small percentage on every transaction, right? You have to think that if your users are doing a lot of actions, it's taking 1 second to do all those actions. There's all this overhead that they're waiting, and this, and they're waiting that. And these are very small, tiny examples. So maybe in your situation, it might be more than a second. So all those things add up. They add up. And so if you can convert the transactional stuff to happen on server, first, you're going to get faster performance, the more responsive to the user. And second, you open up all kinds of interesting opportunities and avenues for transactional processing, which means you can store the values, auditing, which means you can audit what happened. So there's all kinds of interesting opportunities that come from that. Obviously, when you're talking about PSOS, you have to really think about the implications that it has. You can't just keep sending PSOS requests to the server. If they take a long time, they might stack up, and then you have a negative performance impact. So you have to really be careful what you're doing there. And there's a whole blog post about PSOS logging that I wrote, and so there's a way to monitor what's going on and how long it takes. So that's also worth considering. Take special care when relying on PSOS. The PSOS log I told you about, you can look at it on the Beeswax website. And there's also some things that you can do with deferred and immediate. So immediate is a person needs to edit a record. There's some data there that needs to be returned immediately to the user. So that's an immediate PSOS call. But it maybe there's some other deferred things that you can do. So you could send them to the server and put them in a table, and then they get queued up and then evaluated as time comes. So different approaches of using PSOS. So let's look at native editing. Native editing, what I mean by that is you just built a FileMaker solution, and you're going to go in there and you're going to edit the data in the fields. And how many of you use the allow creation of related records through the portal? A lot of you use it? Okay. You might change your mind after this. Pessimistic record locking. So this is inherently pessimistic. When you edit a record in FileMaker, what it does is it locks the record. Someone else goes to that record, they can't edit the record because you have locked that record. If you're editing, let's say I have some data in I have a record, like concert tours. We're going to see an example of that. And I have tasks like setting up the stage, setting up the lighting, doing a sound check, and I'm editing a portal row in that record. Have I locked the parent record, yes or no? No? How many say no? How many say yes? The yes wins. You've locked the parent record as well. So someone going there and needing to change the road manager for that tour cannot change it because you've locked both the child record and the parent record. It's important to understand how FileMaker works in those cases. So as soon as you start typing, FileMaker holds on to this lock and says, this user has locked this record. Nobody else can change it. Okay? So using this technique, there's no extra work you need to do because FileMaker takes care of everything. All the unstored calcs that you built in your solution, they would all work. So it's very simple to use, but it has drawbacks. It can be very slow over a WAN, and so that's something to consider. Okay, local edits. Local edits. So what this opens the door to is optimistic record locking. So I take the data and I put it into global fields locally. Okay, now I've just captured a copy of that data into global fields. I make as many changes into those global fields as I want. Have I locked the record yet? No, the record is not locked yet. Okay, so if I submit this and I submit it via PSOS, I send it to the server and I have the script act on the record and put the data in. As you saw, the difference in time from like almost 1 second to 0.006 seconds. So that I can transact on that record very, very quickly. Okay? So the likelihood of someone else colliding with me on that data, mind you, we're not talking about banking systems and all kinds of highly transactional systems, and you have to use your judgment in terms of where this works. But the likelihood of that colliding with someone else, very, very unlikely. So it gives you the opportunity to improve performance in the solution, and we'll look at some examples. And it also allows you to do something that FileMaker natively doesn't do, which is if I have 10 fields on a record, and I make one change to one field, and I save it, what happens when I communicate back and forth to the server versus regarding the record? The whole record moves up to the server. And if I have a copy of that record and I'm seeing it somewhere else, when FileMaker commits that, it knows that, oh, these other clients are viewing this record. I need to send them updates. It sends the whole record to them. So doing it via PSOS, you could do things where you send only the information that you've changed to the server. And then you put in that transaction transactionally. And because you do it transactionally, you can also edit that transaction. Okay. And then by doing it transactionally, there's this cool thing that you can do. You can actually have the fields actually store the data, like store the results of those calculations. And so it gives you auditing. The drawbacks, it's more work to set up. It's not trivial. It takes a little bit more effort to set up. Maintaining, so this can be a local file. I'm going to talk about that. Maintain a local file, like a cached copy of the data. And security concerns, but we'll look at that when we get into the examples. And relying on PSOS. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so this is, well, I had when we looked at the data API, I had a big aha moment. I discovered, Darren and I were looking at this, and we discovered that the data API is transactional. It's like, wow, that's like, you know how Todd Geist have been, has many posts about his, building transactional logic in FileMaker. So you have a record, and then you have a portal, and if you loop through the portal records and you update all those and something goes wrong, you say revert record, everything gets reverted, right? Everybody know about that? Okay. The data API is transactional in its very own behavior, meaning that you can package up related data that's related through a portal, and you can send not just the parent data, but all the related data and have it go in, and all that data gets committed at the same time. So there's no need to actually write a script to loop through the data and set it. It's all or nothing. So this kind of got the gears going with my team and say, hey, how could we piggyback off the data API? So we'll see that in an example. Using the data API, the benefits are similar. It gives you this idea that you can have optimistic record locking, improved performance, the ability to send only the changes that are changed. So it's very lightweight in terms of network traffic. It gives you transactional control, stored values, and auditing. The drawbacks, more work to set up, but less work than the other one, because you're actually just building a JSON data API friendly blob of data. And when you submit that, that's all that you need. And you're just waiting for a result of success. And if you've got that, then you can audit whatever got changed. So it's actually less work than the other one before. And you need to have some data API skills. So you need someone who knows what they're doing there. And then it relies on the data API. There's other things that we're exploring with being able to trigger scripts with the data API. But triggering scripts is not the same as PSOS. They don't have asynchronous support in the data API for triggering scripts. And so in the future, hopefully they will do that, and it will open up some really interesting opportunities and possibilities. So I'm going to skip over this really quick. The other idea is to use web viewers and build web viewers that have the same kind of logic. It presents a UI, but mostly I'll cover the drawbacks with this. It's more work to set up. You need JavaScript skills to understand what you're doing there. And in this case, you would use maybe even the data API to submit it, or the PSOS. Okay, some of the tricks to getting those stored calculations to evaluate is very, very, very simple. You put in a timestamp field, okay, and let's say the field is called modified. It's not an auto-enter modification timestamp. It's an actual just timestamp field. And if you want to move from an unstored calc to a stored calc, in this kind of scenario, you would put your calculation in here for that field. Let's say I wanted a count of all the tasks completed on that concert tour. Anytime I set a timestamp in modified, it automatically will recalculate the count of those records. And that's really, really important, if you want to see performance gains in a solution, and we'll look at an example of that later. So, okay, so let's take a look. Let's take a look at an example here. So I'm going to switch over to my videos and show you this one here. So this one is native editing. So basically, I'm typing in a portal, and I'm setting up some related records. Okay, so this is allow creation of related data. Okay, and just typing in there, and I started that tool that I told you about, the network monitor tool. It's in the FileMaker community. I can share the link. I think I have it on one of the slides. And so right now, what basically the network monitor tool uses the FileMaker cache to look at how much network traffic is going over 5003. And so it's a little bit, it's a little bit picky. You have to start it, you have to stop it, and then you have to clear the cache, and the tool takes care of all of that. So now I stop it. And I'll create my record, and you'll see down there at the bottom, let's see if I can zoom in here. Okay, so you see down at the bottom here, right, how long it took. Can I move this? Yeah, so 987 bytes of data in and 1,244 bytes of data going out. Okay, and that was using native editing, pure FileMaker, no fancy stuff, just native editing. Okay. Let's look at another one. Let's close this one. So that's native editing. Let's do editing using this technique that I call using the data API. And we'll cover this in more detail, but you'll see what happens here. So basically, on opening of this file, I exported a local file. That local file has schema similar to what is in the main file. I set up a variable file reference to that local file. It could be in a temp directory anywhere. So anything I'm doing in here is all local. There's not communication with the server at all. Okay, and then when I'm ready, I just basically save it. It sends that data over the data API. The data API tells me it was successfully inserted. Okay, and that's one transaction, and everything then you can do on the server, you can do things like have all those values be stored. That's a really big deal. So compare the differences here, and it's pretty dramatic. So the top one is the native editing one, right? So a pretty significant difference in data transferred over the network. Okay, and you get all kinds of benefits. So for a little extra work, you have some interesting opportunities for how you enter data and work with the record. Any questions so far? Everybody understand how this is working? No? We can look. Yeah, like so like in this file here, let me this is the video. Let me hide this. Let me open it up. All right. And so here, I'll open up the hosted file. Okay, so now as I open it up, it already exported a local file. That local file is on my desktop. It's called Concert Tours Local. Okay, so it's got some data in there because we're not cleaning it up, but normally when we would submit the data, we would get rid of it. So there's no other lingering data in there. So let me go ahead and delete this record. Okay, so there's no data in there right now. Let me go and say I want to edit Elvis Costello record. And so now I have a record in there. So this window is your local editing. This card window is a view into your local local file. I packaged up the data that I want. I sent it to the local file. And now any data that I interact in this record, I'm not doing any back and forth traffic with FileMaker server. We have a lot of needs for a client to sometimes act on a large array of data, and they need all kinds of calculations. And in that local file, you can do all kinds of things. Summary fields, unstored calcs, do everything that you want, like native FileMaker, and don't worry about performance. It's all local. Okay, the other benefit this gives you is that with the globals, there's a problem with the globals. And that is, if I edit a record and I edit one record, I might need to set up another record at the same time because I'm not done. You can't do that with the globals. Because if I do this with globals, let's say I go Emerson, Lake and Palmer, I edit that record, and I edit this one, Elvis Costello. Oops, what did I do here? Did I do the wrong thing? Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Oh, that's a bug. It's not supposed to be like that. That's supposed to actually load that record. So it does work, except there's a bug in here that we just got the editing in this the data API demo. So it might have been a problem here, but it does work where you can have different windows with different copies. Okay. All right. Let's take a look at. Okay. Let's look at what was the question? Yeah, so like what you would do is you would package up the data that represents this record as a JSON object, and then you would send it to the local file, and then the local file would say, oh, okay, I need to create you a record, and because you have a file reference, a variable file reference to that local file, then that local file, you call a layout in that local file that, that opens up and shows you, let's see here, basically shows you this layout here. Where is it? This one here. So like we just saw this before. So like if I go back to this one and I go edit, that's this, the data lives in this local file, but it's in this card window attached to this hosted file. Okay? So let's look at a couple of other videos that I recorded. So okay, let's look at this one here. This is called you know, all the US people they always have this fascination with Elvis. So this is called Searching for Elvis. So I'm gonna type Elvis Costello here. I'm looking for the concert tour for Elvis. There it is. And now I'm going to stop the monitor, and it's going to, you know, tell me how much time it took there. Okay, this is so all I did was I searched for a record. Okay, so the network monitor tool, how you have to use it is every time you want to set up a test, you quit and you clear the cache. And then you launch it again and you set up your environment such that you're ready to do that test. Okay, so you want to have the test just right at the moment when you're going to test something. Okay, and so this, so we'll look now at the next video and then we'll compare the times. Okay, so I'm going to close this one. I'm going to open up this other video, and so this time we're going to do the same thing, except I'm going to explain to you what the differences are when it's done. So I'm going to do the same search. And this is this one here is with one field on the layout that's different. Just one field that's different. Okay, so let's look at the results. So one field difference. Okay, look at the differences. So, okay, searching for Elvis using unstored calc, one unstored calc on a layout, 834 bytes in and 390 out. Okay, so, and with a stored calc on the layout, big difference. Okay, and we're talking like trivial, stupid little example. We're not talking about, a system that has hundreds of fields and complicated calculations, etc. Like, this is very different when you start looking at real-world solutions. So the difference is that field, because it's stored, what do you think the benefit is when you look at that one record? Anybody know what was going on behind the scenes? So that stored field is part of that record. It's an attribute of that record. Because it's an attribute of that record, there's no extra work FileMaker needs to do. It's a stored value. So it just returns that record. In the other scenario where the field was unstored and it's on the layout, FileMaker says, hold on. I got to calculate this. It's unstored. Let me go and get the records that represent that. Let me calculate them. Let me get the result. And then we bring it back. So it's got all this extra work to do, and all that means extra network traffic. Okay? And so that's in a small example. You can imagine you amplify that to a larger solution. You've got all kinds of things that you'll start to discover and decide, wow, this is, if I design things differently, it could have a big impact on users and their performance. So, any questions so far? Yes. You call it because you have a variable file reference to it. So you can call scripts in it. If you put table occurrences from the local file in your hosted file, which you can do if you want to, you will never be able to close your local file. Because once you have a table occurrence in the graph, you can't close that. FileMaker, even though you close it, it comes up again. So if you don't add table occurrences on your graph, you can say, okay, I submitted the transaction, and now I can just close that file. And you can remove the record, so there's no trace of the record, still lingering locally. Okay. Any other questions? Nope. All right. Let's move on with my slides here. Let's see where I am. Oh, sorry. Slides. All right. If you wanted to, try this, you could try it right now too. There's the account name and password for it. I mean, that is read only, so you could get in there and submit data over the data API, but you wouldn't be able to edit a record locally. And so we'll cover that in a next slide. So let me kind of give you some background to how this evolved. So we have a lot of projects where we work on that solutions are needing to be worldwide. We have for the clients that we work with, they have people logging in to Cupertino from Australia, Japan, Europe, Canada, China, any place in the world. Okay, and so this is kind of like a before and after when we started making some changes. And so these are the tables, the base tables, the fields, scripts, layouts, unstored calcs. We went from 103 down to 9. Using these techniques, we said, okay, we're going to remove these unstored calcs, we're going to do things transactionally, etc. And so the users never lock a record. They never lock the record implicitly. They lock it through this transactional process. Okay? And so we reduced that by a huge amount, over 90%. And so we had 64% roughly in reduction of code, so less code to maintain. And the benefits were dramatic. So like opening the file, 84% faster. Creating a new project, 89% faster. Project list, 80% faster. Admin view, 93%. Okay, so lots of really dramatic enhancements there. Let me go back 1 second. Sorry, I jumped ahead too quickly. So yeah, those numbers are pretty impressive. So yeah. So the client all of a sudden, when we create a new project for them, instead of them having to interact with the server all the time, they're interacting with data locally. Okay, they're filling out this form. There's no traffic on the server. And then when they submit it, all that processing happens on the server, and then they get a result back. So there's a lot of creative things that you can do to improve performance if you rely on PSOS. And now the combination of the data API also opens up the door for interesting things. Okay, I always love talking about, I think last year at DevCon I gave this talk about intersections. And so, card windows, PSOS offers this interesting opportunity of intersections where you can do transactions and you can do audits. So because you're transacting the data at that very moment and you can log exactly what changed, you can actually have some really fine-grained auditing. So, and the same thing goes for the data API. So you can build faster performance. So whether it's PSOS or data API, you can do things with regards to auditing and transactions and all that. So there's lots of cool opportunities here that I think you can explore with. Okay, so typical security looks like this, right? So normally you have a mix of they can read, they can write, and they can delete or whatever. But the changes that we made to security look more like this. You only get read-only. That's it. You can see the data, and if you get read-only, you may have limited read-only in some tables. So some data you may not be able to see it because that's your security restriction is you can't see that data, but you never get edit, you never create, or you never get delete. Okay, so you can see the data, but the only way to edit, create, or delete the data is transactionally. So, and then because you've got that workflow that's going through this process, you can do all that logging as well. And so the only table where we have ability to edit is in our focus table. Yes, Peter. Yeah, I mean, we got that little notification come back. So like if I had locked a record or a child record or deleted a child record through that data API, you would have gotten an error, okay? So, yeah, so in that case, yes, we're waiting for a reply from the server. So in that case, with PSOS, yes, it's always maintaining the same permissions. We're still exploring the best way to do it with the data API because you log in as read-only, but the data API is sending it on your behalf with a different permission. So that's, it's a little bit kind of California style, All right. So this is native FileMaker editing. Let's say I have a database. I'm entering, calorie intake for different fruits or vegetables, right? And I create a record, and I need all this extra data on each one of these. In FileMaker natively, let's say it takes you about 15 seconds to enter all that data, right? It would take me about, I could probably enter 4 of those records, 4 of those individual records because I have locked the parent record. But with the transactional method I'm showing you here today, I could enter a lot of data in those 15 seconds about one item. And so you have a lot more data that you can capture. So roughly on the scale, it's about 5,000 records that you can capture in that time span of 1 second. So like 20,000 20,000 records in a second. So 333 records per second is what, if like we did the math and figured out like, okay, it takes you this much time to lock that record every time you put it in. And so that's how much data you can, in theory, push through this process. Now, you also have to consider like the transactional volume of your system. So if you have a lot of transactional activity, this scenario, you might say, well, what happens if I have record locks, if I have a record that I'm updating and someone else has locked it. So there's ways that you can write your, like, let's say you're sending it via PSOS. In that case, you're sending the data you want it transacted. So in that case, the script has to find the record and lock it. And the script can do things like pause for a little bit and try again. So in those cases, that can resolve those record collisions. But we did a lot of testing internally. We had people on the same very record trying to submit, data, and we never had any collisions. So it's very unlikely, and so that you'll get those kinds of collisions. With the data API, it's very different because the data API will guarantee your success of your data being submitted. So once you get that success, the data's in there. Okay, recap. It's not so much optimistic versus pessimistic, but understanding the differences in how FileMaker works. It's considerations if you choose to go the optimistic, not pessimistic, but pessimistic approach. Meaning, FileMaker is pessimistic by its nature. I always get those confused. It is pessimistic. That's why it locks it for you. And if you break away from that, you're using an optimistic record locking approach. And if you go down that route, you definitely need to know what you're doing, okay? And you need to make sure that transactions go in successfully, etc. It gives you the ability to control calculations, so that those calculations then you determine when they get evaluated, so that then you can store them. And so there's interesting opportunities there. It's giving you some, you have to have considerations if you're going to instead use PSOS to do this. So I think, and then if you also have to have a lot of considerations when you're using the data API. So I think that's now for questions. Any more questions, or we can look at more of the example file? Yes. Yeah. Should do. That's a good point. So how many of you know Clay Mackel? The architect of FileMaker? So I asked Clay, I said, it would be really cool if we could, on the fly, create some schema, and that schema would be local. Like, I need a temporary table, and I want to act on this table, and in the typical Clay Mackel fashion, he rolls his eyes and goes, I don't know, like maybe. But no, he can't do it because all of the schema that's there is connected to the server. There's something about how it's architected that even if we created it, the server would know about it. So you're always communicating back and forth to the server. You could bring up this question with James tomorrow. He's the, I guess, CTO or architect or whatever. But we need stuff like this, right? We need to be able to say, I don't want a network connection right now. I want to do this locally, and whatever. I mean, we need tools like this. But this is a way to kind of get there, and it's a pretty, it's a pretty clever way, I would say, to have a local file that you can do, schema that represents it, and do all this calculation that sometimes may be very, very network traffic heavy. And then package it up and just get the result you need and submit it. So, but yes, definitely wish we had tools like this. The other thing, which brings up a good point, I'm glad you mentioned it. I'm going to switch over here 1 second. How many of you know this website? This website here. You know this website? Okay, if you do a search on my name, you'll find a lot of things on here. Please vote for them. Okay. We need tools to measure. I keep telling FileMaker, like, the network monitor tool is a very cool tool. but we need a tool. We need built-in tools to measure things so that we as developers can know what's going on, right? And not have to use these stupid techniques where you get rid of half the objects on the layout and see if it's faster. We need, like, just like Safari debug, you need to know, hey, this field on this portal has this stupid value list that's taking 2 seconds to evaluate because the value list is from the wrong context. I would know that immediately if I had a tool like this. And so as developers, we need to let FileMaker know we need these tools to understand what is going on under the hood. Otherwise, we build crappy solutions that have a bad reputation for FileMaker in the world. So please vote. Yes?
Do you distribute the local file on the host that don't have the local one?
You don't need to distribute the local file. Let me show you. Okay, so I'm gonna quit FileMaker. I'm gonna go to my desktop. Okay, if I'm in with full access, I'm gonna get rid of my local files. I'm gonna open up that hosted file. Okay, so all right, so log me in here. So log in. The local file is brought to me on opening of this window. Wait a minute. Is it in here? It's supposed to be in here. Oh, it might be that it's in my temp directory. But basically, it installs it at the time that you open the file. And the local file is embedded inside a container inside the hosted file. So it's like I take it out from inside, I drop it over here, I get a file reference to it, now I open it up and I declare a variable file reference. Anybody like over here? Manage external data sources. I have a variable file reference to that local file, meaning that I declare the path to it at the time that I run it. And now it's open locally, and I can push data into it, and then the scripting inside that local file is set up, in this case, for this demo, for using the data API. Okay? Any other questions? Yes, over here. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yep. 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 That's old data, yeah. So again, the thing is you have to understand the environment and what you're doing and what you're offering to the clients. And in some situations, that situation might be that, hey, I need to see the latest data. You can, what we've done in the past is we built a hash of the data that I've gotten at the time that I started to edit the data. We call it, there's the ghost of Christmas past, present, and future. So we have the hash of the past, we have the hash of the present, and we have the hash of the future. So the hash of the present would be the server, the hash of the future would be the one that I'm submitting, and the hash of the past is the one that I used. So you can use this technique to hash the data and see, like, has it changed on the server? No, so I'm going to submit it. Have I made any changes? No, so I'm not going to submit it. So you can use that to help in those situations. But I also state that because we do a lot of auditing, we don't really care that you go in and you make a change and someone else goes in later and makes another change. There's an audit history of, like, oh, this person changed this to this and this person changed this to this. So we have auditing to back it up. And the other thing I like to say is that sometimes, the modification count that FileMaker says, oh, record modification count, you check that before you submit it, but that's really not an accurate measure because you could have 10 attributes in a table and I'm only editing 2 of them and you're editing 2 other ones. Really, you really want a hash of only the things that you're interested in and to see if those have changed in any way, because you're not going to conflict by changing the date and I'm changing the road manager. So using the record modification count is not a good way to kind of do this, but using a hash is a better way to reliably say, okay, no one changed it, I can change it. So in the business requirements that you need, maybe you need to know that no one is changing it unless they know what they have the latest version. You could use the hash to do that. Next question? You had more questions on this side, yes.
You use, so far I understand you use globals in the local file.
In the local file? No.
Oh, okay.
It's records.
Okay.
Yeah, the globals was a technique that we had before.
Okay.
And the globals were not a good way because we start editing in one window, you get the same globals in another window, and yeah, so those are individual records. Question, yes? Yes. Yeah. That's okay. So let me let me show you that example I did before. Cohen, how much time do I have left? 8 minutes? Okay. So in this example, let's say I go to this record, Elvis Costello. I put in a lot of records for Elvis Costello, so there's a lot of, there's about 50 records. And some of them are completed and some of them are not. So I get a count here of completed tasks, and all that is doing is this field is a stored field and the other one is unstored. So basically, it's just counting if it has a date in the completed date. Okay, so it's counting how many records I have with a completed date. And so this field here is unstored. Everybody get that? Okay, so so what I did is to do this test, I put on this layout, let's say I do the test with the unstored calc. So I put the field on there, and so I'll go and test this to do search for Elvis. So I'll open up my my network monitor tool. Let's get this guy. Okay, and so what I'll first do is I'll quit and clear the cache. So always the first thing you want to do is you want to quit and clear the cache. So let's see, let's open up that tool. All right. Okay, so now the tool is ready. I'll go here and I'll say I want to open up my solution. And so because I'm not really measuring the opening, I don't have to start recording yet. So I can do the recording later. So open up the solution, and I put myself in the state just before I wanna do the test. So that the cache data has not been activated with the results. So I'll go into find mode. I'll go to that layout. Okay, now I'm ready. I'm ready to execute the find. I'm going to go here. Let me close this. I'm going to start the monitor, and I'm going to say, that's weird. Okay. Elvis. Okay, stop the monitor. That's 827 in, 390 out. Okay, create a log record, native, find. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing. I am going to quit and clear before I do that, let me change this field to be the stored value, this one here. So the difference is that one was unstored. So when FileMaker displays that field on the layout, it has to go and fetch those other related records, calculate how many of them are completed, and give you a result, because the field is unstored, right? So now that field is stored, and that calculation is simply if modified, nothing, don't return anything, and then count of the tasks. There's actually a better way to do this. You could do it with a let statement and do something like this. Tilde x, you could say modified, like that. And then you have this calculation over here in there. So this is actually Steve, one of our developers pointed out that this is actually better because by putting the quote there, you're actually casting it to a string, and then so there's some funny situations like that. This is actually a little bit better to do it this way. Okay, so all that does basically is whenever I put in a timestamp in here, it will recalculate the total of records, right? But if I display this when I do a find, what I get is FileMaker has no extra work to do because there's just a static value there to return the result. So let's compare that. Now I have this. Quit and clear the cache. So now FileMaker is going to launch again. Is this strange bug with the network monitor tool that it tries to open itself up when it does that? So okay, now I'm ready. So now I'm going to open up that file again. All right. And I'm going to log in. And I'm going to, again, put myself in the same state to execute the find. Okay. So there's the export of the local file. Okay, so I'm going to go into find mode. I'm going to go to that layout. Am I in find mode? Yeah. I'm going to go to that layout. So I haven't executed the find yet. Okay, so I'm ready here. So I now start. I'll say Elvis. And now I stop. Okay, and then say, what is it? Stored. Okay, so now let's see. Omit this, omit this. So there's your results. Okay, there's the results. Yeah. Does that so that's a little bit of the way to use the network monitor tool. It's in the community. Has anybody found it? Okay, you found it. Okay. Any other questions? Yes. Yeah, Cohen, his microphone is coming.
You mentioned that data API is transaction.
Yes.
Could you elaborate on that? Because I worked with the data API and I've never seen any commands that would allow to control the transaction. So how do you do that?
I mean, you don't get control of the transaction yourself. When you submit
you're
it,
still restricted to one layout.
I believe so. Yeah, I don't think there's any like multiple layouts or unless you build some kind. Yeah, I think it's directed to one layout. But you could have different portals on the layout that touch different data, and you could submit all that together, and everything has to go in. Yeah, but the difference is that the standard FileMaker control that you would get would be via scripting, which would mean that you would have to write a script to say, oh, I'm going to go update the concert tour record, and I want to set the date for the setup of the stage to be this date, and then I want to set up the next portal to be this date, and so on and so forth, until you get to a record where, oh, someone else has locked this record. Now I have to revert. Okay, so. But that's, like scripting and looping over the portal. Yes, you have to have the portal and all this, but when you package up the JSON, it's one request. It's like punching all the data into place. And then if it all succeeds, you get success. Yes, Peter. A little bit louder, please. Yeah. Okay. No. Sorry, I'm sorry. I got maybe that confused. We're using the data API from the local file directly. We're not running PSOS. PSOS was we were doing that with the global fields. Okay. Okay, so we're still evolving that technique a little bit. Right now, if I were to log in as read-only, let me do that. Cohen, do I have time? 2 more minutes? Okay. So let me let me log in. Let me log in read only. Oops. Okay, so I go in here, read only, and just to prove, I don't have access to edit, okay? So I don't have access there. I go in here and I set the end date of this task to be the 17th, okay? I submit it, the data API. The data API sends it to the server and transacts it on that record using a different account name, okay? It's an account that's tied for the data API purpose only. Now, argue that maybe that's not a good idea because I want to know who acted on it, etc. You could give yes, we could give those credentials to the user as well. Again, this is a little bit evolving. It's very short that we've kind of evolved this technique, whatever, using the data API. We've been mostly doing it with the local file, gathering up the results, packaging it up through PSOS, and using that, you're using the same account name and privilege that the user logged in with, but you're running that script on the server with full access. So the data acts on behalf of that user, but with full access. You get the same results, but you maintain the credentials of the user. So in this case, it's still evolving a little bit. We still don't have how we're going to do it, but yes, the idea would be that we would maintain the credentials so that if you were to look at it in the audit, you'd say, oh, this user made those change. Yes. When? Why did we start using the data API? Because it's a lot less work for us to code it. Because it's one script step, right? Once you package up the JSON, it's one script step and you wait for a success. Plus, in the other one, we would be setting all those fields, every one of them. We get from the JSON, from packaging it all up. We'll be setting each one of those fields individually and then logging every change, right? With the data API, we know what data we want to put and what data needs edited. If it goes in successfully, it gets audited, sorry. If it doesn't go in successfully, you tell the user something happened, it doesn't go in. So we like the data API better because it's less work for us and it's more kind of transactionally friendly. Any other questions? Yes, last question. Yeah, I can hear you, but I used to be a drummer. So that's all I have to say. Go ahead. Go ahead. Uh-huh. Yeah. Okay, yeah. I answered this question for this gentleman. Yeah. Okay, so basically if we need two things. One is we generate a hash of the before, current, and future. And so we can compare different ways to make sure that no one else has made changes and so on and so forth. So we do it that way if we need. And plus we have auditing, so we can see what happened to the fields in that table. I don't have the slides up yet, but I will plan on putting the slides and this file up on the site. So I will follow up with that. Okay, Peter, last question. It's okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes. But the problem is, so as you know this very well, because you're doing the data API stuff running on server, when you run PSOS, there's overhead to running PSOS. It's like the on-open scripts. Mm-hmm. Right. Yep. Uh-huh. Yeah. You call into the current file and then you submit. Yeah. Yeah. That's I like that. Okay. You get points, bonus points. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.